So, recently Adam Gopnik wrote an article for The New Yorker about the Oscars Best Picture fiasco, and it's given me food for thought.
Moonlight, you guys won Best Picture.
In his article, Gopnik considered the possibility that we might be living in a computer simulation, or the Matrix as he referred to it, and that the series of bizarre events over the past year or so in entertainment, sports, and politics might all be a sign that the simulation is
Together,
glitching out. Gopnik was referencing the simulation argument by Nick Bostrom, an argument that tries to show how it's not just possible, but even likely that we may be living in a computer program. In his 2003 paper, Are You Living in a Computer Simulation?, Bostrom argues that if we assume our civilization will advance to the point where we can eventually use computers to simulate lifelike human beings, then it is almost certain that we ourselves are simulated.
Each mature civilization that devoted some resources to this purpose could run astronomical numbers of ancestor simulations. You can show that if the first two possibilities do not obtain, then there will be many more simulated people like us than there will be non-simulated people like us. In other words, almost all people with our kinds of experiences would be living inside simulations rather than outside them.
I think it's fascinating how Bostrom's theory has gotten so popular that now even the New Yorker is discussing it. But there's this one thing I keep noticing popping up when people talk about the simulation argument. In his article, Gopnik referred to the simulation as the Matrix, referencing the Wachowskis' famous film, and he is not alone in doing that.
Which was a little bit surprising. And he argues that the notion of a simulated universe, that, the Matrix, if you will,
maybe we're in a simulated world, much like the world depicted in the movie The Matrix.
Admitting that we live in a computer simulation and saying that that's basically a secular God. What's the difference?
Well, first of all, I've decided my name should be Morpheus, not Jim.
Okay. Well,
I'm Mario. Nice to meet you, Morpheus.
Morpheus.
Exactly.
Yes. You have to see the movie Matrix and play video games to follow this conversation at this moment.
But
Morpheus.
But as I said,
Now, it's not that I don't like The Matrix. The Matrix will always be kind of special for me because it marks the first time I can remember really being floored by a philosophical idea. But that idea is fundamentally different from the simulation argument. The Matrix isn't an example of Bostrom's simulation, but of philosophical skepticism, an extreme form of skepticism that throws even our most basic beliefs into question. According to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, quote, "The Matrix depicts a situation similar to that imagined by a typical philosophical skeptic, in which it is not possible for the Matrix-bound characters to obtain evidence for determining that things are not as they seem."
Who is it? This isn't real. What is real?
So basically, Neo's going through his life believing he's just some guy living and working in 20th century America, and everything he sees and hears from when he wakes up to when he goes to sleep seems to support that belief. But then he red pills and he learns the reality that he's just been sitting in a robot battery tube his entire life, and everything he saw and heard was just an illusion produced by the Matrix. We in the audience are thus invited to start questioning our own beliefs and experiences, because how can we be sure we're not in the same situation as Neo? Philosophical skepticism works by proposing an alternate scenario that explains all the evidence of our senses just as well as our common sense explanation, making us wonder as to the legitimacy of that explanation. The first philosopher to articulate philosophical skepticism in its modern form was René Descartes in his Meditations on First Philosophy. For Descartes, it wasn't the Matrix but an evil spirit that he was afraid might be deceiving him, but it's the same basic idea as the movie. There's a lot to unpack in the Meditations, but right now I just want to focus on an interesting stylistic quirk of Descartes' writing, the fact that he chose to write entirely in the first person. Throughout the Meditations, Descartes writes using I, me, my, and indeed it is this first-person speaker, this I, which is responsible for his most famous philosophical propositions. Descartes uses his personal style because he doesn't want us to read his meditations, but to live them. The individual reader is meant to put themselves in the place of the meditation's narrator and to go through Descartes' project of radical doubt for themselves. We are meant not just to hear of someone who doubts, but to doubt. Not just to read cogito ergo sum, but to speak it. This speaking subject, this I, therefore, had to be written generically as possible so that anyone could assume it. It is pure pronoun with no person attached. It has no distinct personality, no strong opinions, and no real function other than to exist and to react to things. Which brings me to Keanu Reeves. Keanu Reeves as Neo is this I.
Open your mouth, say ah.
So a lot of people like to complain about how Keanu's acting is kind of stilted and how he only has one reaction face to everything and how he's pretty much only there so the audience can have a blank surrogate to project themselves onto. If we read The Matrix as a Cartesian parable, however, then all these attributes become strangely apropos. Neo is functioning exactly like the Cartesian I. He is pure subject stripped of all other identity factors, save for the drive to discover reality and ultimate self-knowledge. Neo might be a boring character, but it's impossible to imagine the Matrix without him. In the same way that Descartes' entire meditation is built around the I, the Matrix movies are structurally dependent on Neo and our ability to plug into him, so to speak. The Matrix unfolds along the axis of Neo's journey from ignorance to knowledge and self-mastery, mirroring the speaker's journey in Descartes' meditations. So how is all this different from the simulation argument? Well, the fact is the simulation argument just isn't that concerned with the individual subject or radical doubt, the way that Descartes' philosophical skepticism is.
So it's different in this respect from these traditional arguments in philosophy that have challenged somebody to try to prove that the external world exists, or prove to me that I'm not dreaming, or something like that. Prove to me that I'm not a brain in a vat, just being fed sensory input. Rather, the simulation argument starts by assuming everything is as it seems. It starts by assuming that science tells us about the world, that we have computers in the external world, that those computers are getting faster and better with passing time. And then using that scientific picture to think about what kind of capabilities will eventually be available to a mature civilization.
Whereas Descartes was focused on the individual, doubt, and the nature and reliability of personal experience, Boostrom concerns himself with civilizations, technology, and likelihoods. He moves beyond Descartes' obsession with subjective experience and knowledge and instead asks questions about the possibilities and limitations of technology and what large groups of humans are likely to do with that technology. Whereas Descartes' meditation constantly says I, the primary pronoun used in Boostrom's paper is we. Boostrom's simulation is the Matrix without a Neo. It's a vision of the world that affords no special place to you or your subjective experience. Boostrom does not see the mind as either a prison, a refuge, or a reservoir of power just waiting to be unlocked with the magic words I think, I am. Your thoughts, your memories, your ideas could all just be part of the simulation, mere details indistinct from the rest of reality streaming by in a cascade of zeros and ones. If there's anything to take away from Adam Gopnik's article in The New Yorker, it's that philosophy doesn't exist in a vacuum. The simulation argument is intimately tied to advances made in computer technology, and the argument seems to have found a special resonance with people whose lives have been so profoundly shaped by that technology. Identity is being challenged, collapsed, and reformulated by the rise of the information age, and subjectivity as we once understood it is becoming obsolete. It's inevitable that movies and stories are going to start popping up that reflect these new experiences and new ways of being, and they're going to look and feel a lot different from the Matrix movies when they do. Something more like HBO's Westworld, I think.
There is no threshold that makes us greater than the sum of our parts, no inflection point at which we become fully alive.
But that's a video for another time. For now, I hope you enjoyed, and thanks for watching.
We can't define consciousness because consciousness does not exist. Humans fancy that there's something special about the way we perceive the world, and yet we live in loops as tight and as closed as the hosts do, seldom questioning our choices, content for the most part to be told what to do next.